So I will be explaining my concept map of the entire semester based on all the modules that we've done. So the first one I'm going to talk about is culturally responsive teaching, and that is what I've learned from the reading. It's a theory related to teaching based on the idea that culture underlines every aspect of education, from the curriculum and assessments to learning and teaching styles to the methods and administration and supervision. And this began in the 1970s to address educators' concerns about why minority students chronically underperform in school. And so I connected this to low expectations towards minority students because I read this statistic that said that 47% of black students are more likely not to graduate high school, which I think is crazy that some teachers just automatically assume this when it may not be true. And the next one I connected it to was racism and ethnically shared culture. And I connected these two because I think race, ethnicity, and culture-responsive teaching can be connected, because if a teacher is not culturally responsive to her students, then the students can feel as though they are being discriminated against. And that's not good. All students just want to be loved and welcomed into the classroom, and I just think it's ridiculous that some teachers just don't make that their classroom a safe place for their students to come and learn. Knowing that, I'm kind of just going to explain what each of them mean. For example, race refers to the superficial physical differences of a particular society that they consider significant. And it also labels. It's a system of labeling that provides a source of identity. An ethnically shared culture is a shared religion, language, and traditions, practices, values, and beliefs of a certain group. And culture is a dynamic system of social values, cognitive codes, and behavioral standards. And then the achievement gap is a student-centered strategy that embraces a learning community model for the organization of a classroom. These embrace the learning community model for the organization of a classroom. I think the culturally responsive teaching was important to connect to the achievement gap in minority groups, because the primary goal of culturally responsive teaching is to address the achievement gap between minority and white students. And I thought that was very important. Going into a little more detail about the module of racism and ethnicity, I wanted to kind of explain what they are more, because it's important to distinguish between all of them. So racism was present during the apartheid era, and it's a set of beliefs about superiority and one of the racial ethnic groups that were used to justify inequality. Then we go into prejudice. Prejudice is a prejudgment or negative idea about a particular group based on generalizations and stereotypes that are most unlikely to change. And this is commonly the motives for discrimination. And then on discrimination, it's an unequal treatment based on their membership of a social group or ethnic minority. And then we go to institutional discrimination, and that carried out by the government, schools, businesses, and practice policies that discriminate and affect entire groups of individuals. And then individual discrimination is a person that treats another person unfairly due to their ethnicity or their race or just anything like that. So I think those are really important to distinguish. Another module that we did that's really important to distinguish is sexuality. A lot of people can confuse transgender from gender identity to the sexuality to, the sexual orientation. And I thought this was important to connect culturally responsive teaching to sexuality, because I feel like being a culturally responsive teacher is making sure that the curriculum and the lesson plans and all of that kind of stuff is representative to all the students and ethnics depending on their background. So that I thought that was really important to note with that. And then moving on to the definitions within the sexuality module. I think those are really important to distinguish as well. So sexuality is a person's sexual orientation or preference. And then the sex is what you're born with. It's a sociological and biological character, such as the genitals, whatever, the chromosomes, stuff like that. And then gender is a social and sociological character, behavior, mindset. And then transsexual is what fits under the umbrella of transgender. And sexual orientation is an attribution someone has to another individual, such as gay, straight, bi, something like that. And then gender identity is a person that identifies as male, female, or anything like that other. And then there was this example, it says around 2 years old, children become conscious of their physical differences between boys, girls, before 3 years old. Most children can easily label themselves as a boy or a girl, and they can express gender identity by their hairstyles or their clothing, or nicknames or preferred name, stuff like that. This topic, I decided to connect religion to culturally responsive teaching, and I think this connection is really important because as a future educator, I think it is really important to understand that we will have various types of religions coming into our classroom, and it is important to know that it's not okay to discriminate based on their religion. All students should be treated the same, no matter where their background is from. So, religion plays an important role in social studies. It is important to know and understand other religious beliefs. Some educators believe that the concept between church and state is a reason to avoid the topic of religion, but some accept that education about religion is essential. And knowing this, students must understand religion in order to make sense of topics such as the Crusades or topics like the election of JFK or, more recent events such as 9/11 and stuff like that. And I think this helps explain why every state and school district make references to increasing students' knowledge of world religions and stuff like that. To the top of my concept map, I decided to connect minority group scapegoat theory, Adolf Hitler, and the Rachel and Sadie story because the Rachel and Sadie story is a unique lesson about how teachers can help their students think about the obstacles of speaking up and standing together for social justice, and that's always important to teach students. And the taking the fish out of the water activity highlights the importance of standing up together for a cause, and I really think that taught those students how to do that, even though they might have not understood what the cause was. And it teaches them obedience and discipline. And I decided to connect these three because I think everyone should just listen to everyone's opinions and hear each other's voices. That allows us to accept differences and understand each other and themselves. There is also a story that a classic scapegoating motive claims that Jews intentionally make others ill, and in the Middle Ages, when many Europeans died of the plague, known as the Black Death, Jews were scapegoated and falsely accused of having caused the epidemic by poisoning the water wells. Okay, and on to the last two concept maps. I have intelligence, socioeconomic status, and class. And how do we measure intelligence? There's ability versus knowledge. And ability is the capacity to learn something versus knowledge, and that's whether one has actually learned the material. And what people don't know is it is possible to lack knowledge in a given area. It is possible to assess some aspects of ability, for example, what inputs are needed, what are not, but not all, which is capacity. And then on to Francis Galton. He believed that many human attributes that there are many human attributes, such as intelligence was inherited and stuff like that. And then we move on to Alfred Binet, and he believed that intelligence could be developed. And there's also something called the Binet's test, and that is when, basically the Binet's test is just an intelligence test to see what areas you're good at, what areas you're not good at. So I think that was a really cool test. There is an online one that he did that I took that gives you like a whole grade and what part of your brain is stronger than the others in what specific areas. So that was really cool. And then another person is also Howard Gardner, and he was the one that did multiple intelligences, and there's 8, such as the interpersonal, the intrapersonal, the rhythmic and harmonic, the bodily kinesthetic, the verbal linguistic. So it was really cool to see these as well. And these differences challenge an educational system that assumes that everyone can learn the same materials in the same way, which is really cool to note. And then we move on to poverty. And intelligence connects with poverty because a person with not proper education is not going to be necessarily as successful as a person with the proper education. That's just kind of how it works nowadays. And then we move on to absolute, subjective, and relative poverty. Those are the 3 types of poverty, and the relative poverty states that it's a state of living where people can afford necessities but are unable to meet their society's average standard of living. And then absolute poverty is they lack basic necessities that include, adequate food, clean water, safe housing, and access to health care. And it's basically when someone lives less than $1.25 a day. And looking at that, that's just ridiculous. I don't think anyone would be able to do that. But, people make it work in undeveloped countries just to provide for their families. And then we have subjective poverty, and that's when income does not meet the expectation and perceptions. It's more to do with the person or family who defines themselves, if that makes any sense. The poorest people in this world are women and those in semi-peripheral nations. Women are suffering more in terms of overall well-being. Rates of impoverishment increased for women nearly 20% more than men. And because of these 3 causes, expansion in the number of female-headed households, persistence and consequences in intra-household inequalities, and implementation of the neoliberal economic policies around the world. And at least we move on to the bubble of socioeconomic status and class. And basically, socioeconomics is the social standing of an individual group, and it's a combination of education, income, and occupation. And those who have to work and those who don't necessarily have to, because they live off of work of others, defines the producers and the non-producers, and then people are divided into classes according to their social relationship to the means of wealth production and distribution. These classes can change according to the social status or whatever it is. And then you have 3 types of class statuses in society, such as the working, the middle, and the capital classes. In the working class, they have no other property to seal on a religious basis. They live by selling their labor power for wages, salaries, for example. They're the unskilled, semi-skilled, skilled, professional, and unemployed workers. And they run society from the top to the bottom. In the middle class, they significantly shrunk over time, and people who are in the middle of the social hierarchy, and they fall between the working and the capitalist class, which is a good note. Just to know. And then the capitalist class, they don't have to work to get an income. They draw rent, interest, and profit, such as like surplus value, because they own means of life.